These are the worst punishments ever created by human beings, methods so horrific that just hearing about them makes your skin crawl. From ancient Persia to medieval England, from imperial China to the Roman Colosseum, history overflows with punishments designed not just to kill, but to make the dying wish they were already dead. Let's start with one that sounds almost mythical, but was terrifyingly real. The Brazen Bull was invented around 570 BCE by a craftsman named Perillos of Athens. He built it for Phalaris, the tyrant of Acragas in Sicily, a man notorious for his cruelty. The device was simple in concept and nightmarish in execution. Picture a life-sized hollow bull made of brass or bronze. The victim was locked inside its stomach, and then a fire was lit underneath. You were literally roasted alive inside a metal oven shaped like an animal. But here's the detail that pushes this from brutal to genuinely psychotic. Perillos designed a system of tubes and stops inside the bull's head, so that as the victim screamed in agony, the sound transformed into what resembled the bellowing of an actual bull. The smoke from burning flesh rose through vents designed to smell like incense. When the bull was finally opened, the victim's charred bones supposedly shone like jewels and were fashioned into bracelets. Now here's the twist. When Perillos proudly presented his invention, Phalaris asked him to climb inside and demonstrate the acoustics. The moment he did, Phalaris locked him in and lit the fire. Perillos became the first victim of his own creation. He was pulled out before he died, only to be thrown off a cliff. And Phalaris himself? He was eventually overthrown and, according to legend, killed inside the very same bull. From ancient Sicily, let's travel to ancient Persia, for what might be the most stomach-turning punishment ever recorded. Scaphism, also known as the boats. In 401 BCE, a Persian soldier named Mithridates made the fatal mistake of embarrassing King Artaxerxes II at a royal banquet. The king ordered scaphism. The condemned man was placed inside a hollowed-out boat, and a second identical boat was sealed on top like a shell, with only the victim's head, arms, and legs sticking out. He was then force-fed milk and honey until he developed severe diarrhea. More honey and milk were smeared across his exposed face and limbs. Then the boat was set adrift on stagnant water under the blazing sun. Flies descended on the honey, vermin bred in the filth, accumulating inside the boat. Insects began feeding on the exposed skin, then burrowed into the body itself, eating the victim from the inside out. Mithridates lasted 17 days before he finally died. 17 days of being slowly consumed by insects, while trapped in a floating coffin of his own waste. Moving to medieval England, we find a punishment specifically invented for traitors. Hanging, drawing, and quartering became statutory law in 1352 under King Edward III, though it had been practiced since at least 1241. The process was methodical in its cruelty. First, the condemned was dragged through the streets behind a horse, tied to a wooden panel. Then they were hanged, but cut down while still alive. Then emasculated. Then their abdomen was sliced open and their intestines pulled out and burned in front of them while they watched. Then beheaded. Finally, the body was hacked into 4 pieces. The most famous victim was William Wallace in 1305. After being stripped naked and dragged through London, he was hanged, cut down alive, emasculated, and eviscerated, with his bowels burned before his eyes. His head was dipped in tar and mounted on a spike atop London Bridge, eventually joined by the heads of his brother and fellow Scottish patriots. His 4 limbs were sent to Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth. This punishment was reserved exclusively for men. Women convicted of treason were burned at the stake instead, for reasons of public decency. Now let's talk about Vlad III Dracula, the man who turned impalement into an art form. During his reign from 1456 to 1462, Vlad killed between 40,000 and 100,000 people. though recent scholarship suggests only about 7 to 10% of the claimed impalings can be verified. Even at conservative estimates, that's thousands of people killed in one of the most agonizing ways imaginable. A thick, sharpened stake was forced through the body, often entering from below while the victim sat on the point. The stake was then raised upright, and the victim slid down under their own body weight. Death could take up to 3 days. Vlad arranged his victims in geometric patterns, concentric circles of stakes outside cities. Positioned by rank on high and low spears, he created what became known as the Forest of the Impaled, rows of bodies lining the roads into his territory. It was so horrifying that invading Ottoman armies reportedly turned back rather than march through the valley of rotting corpses. According to a Nuremberg account from 1499, Vlad once had a table set up among his impaled victims so he could eat lunch while they writhed and moaned around him, allegedly dipping his bread in their blood. In China, from around 900 CE until 1905, there existed lingqi, translated as slow slicing or death by 1,000 cuts. The condemned was tied to a wooden frame in public, while an executioner methodically removed pieces of flesh, anywhere from 100 to 3,000 cuts, depending on the sentence. The executioner had to be careful not to let the victim die too quickly. If death came too soon, the executioner himself could face punishment. In traditional Chinese belief, a mutilated body could not find peace in the afterlife. So lingqi destroyed not just the body, but the soul. The last recorded victim was a Mongol guard named Fuzuli, executed on April 10, 1905, just 2 weeks before the practice was officially abolished. And then there was Rome's favorite spectator sport, damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to beasts. From the 2nd century BCE until it was abolished in 681 CE, condemned prisoners were tied to stakes in the Colosseum, while starved lions, bears, leopards, and wild dogs were released into the arena. The animals hadn't eaten for days, sometimes weeks. These executions were scheduled at midday, sandwiched between morning animal hunts and afternoon gladiator fights, like a lunch break entertainment. Under Nero, after the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE, Christians were wrapped in animal skins and thrown to dogs. Here's something interesting, though. Not every famous torture device was real. The Iron Maiden, that spiked coffin you've seen in every horror movie, was almost certainly a Victorian fabrication, invented centuries after the medieval period, to make the Middle Ages seem more barbaric by comparison. And the Spanish Inquisition, despite its terrifying reputation, actually tortured less frequently than secular courts of the same era. Sessions were capped at 15 minutes. Torture was applied twice in only 1% of cases, and never a third time. Any confession obtained under torture was inadmissible and had to be repeated freely afterward. History's worst punishments share something in common. They weren't just about killing. They were about sending a message. Vlad's forests of the impaled, Wallace's head on London Bridge, Rome's midday maulings in the Colosseum. Every single one was designed to be seen, to be remembered, to make anyone watching think twice before stepping out of line. The cruelty was the point, but the audience was the purpose. And the most unsettling thing about all of this isn't that these punishments existed. It's that crowds gathered to watch and cheered,